DNJCRYPTO.
Hey guys, my name is Jeremy Smith. I am the founder of churchandmentalhealth.com, and I was asked to talk about what is it about substance use and how it affects mental health. So I am a licensed clinical counselor in the state of Ohio. I used to work in Colorado, which is where I got my degree at Denver Seminary. Before that, I got to do youth ministry with Youth for Christ, helping out at the Air Force Academy and a couple of rural towns here in Ohio. So I've seen a couple of different areas of life and seen how working with teenagers and adults, whether it's domestic violence offenders, domestic violence victims, people involved in child protective services, probation or parole. I actually helped start up a residential facility for opiate use, and just recently helped start up an outpatient therapy center in a rural town. And mental health is this conversation that's been happening a lot more when we talk about depression and anxiety, schizophrenia, really things that are going on in a person's life that is as much about brain chemistry as it is about systems, where we have family, relationships, people at work, all these things that are happening to us, all of these choices that we are making that lead to these symptoms as well. And so there's so many different things that factor into mental health. There's a whole study happening right now that's been going on for over 30 years called the ACE assessments that talks about the stuff that happens to you as a kid goes on to affect a lot of different areas of your life, obviously with mental health and substance use, but also just medical areas as well, or things that you want to happen, like going to college, getting a career, getting married. But even just the medical things of, like, if you struggle with your family having been divorced, your parents being divorced, or someone going to prison, someone committing suicide, you having been raped, there being abuse or neglect in the home to you or someone in your family, that these things can lead to a shortened life, heart attack, diabetes, all these things that you wouldn't think about beyond mental health and substance use or failed relationships. And so we know that things in our past affect who we are today for positive or negative things. So when we talk about mental health, it is a lot of different things going on. And we know that change happens many different ways, whether it's the individual deciding they're going to make the change themselves, whether the family coming around that person and trying to support them. Maybe it is medication that helps with that. Maybe it's a completely change of life and career or location. I know that when we used to live in Colorado, just the idea of going out for a run was like second nature. Here in Ohio, where it's dreary, it's cold, there's so many Cracker Barrels around, the idea of going for a walk or going out for a run seems kind of foreign, even though just 5 years ago we were living in Colorado enjoying all of that. So we know that these things affect us in many different ways from many different areas. And substance use is something that affects that even more. So I am a co-occurring therapist, which means I talk about mental health services, but I also talk about substance use, and I don't talk about them separately. There are ideologies out there that talk about you should treat one thing and then the other. But if you think about it, when we struggle with mental health, and I do this with my clients, I ask, how much of your mental health do you feel like is part of your story? If I gave you a 100-piece puzzle that is your life right now, how many pieces would be about mental illness? And when I talk about mental illness, we all struggle with sadness. Here in Ohio, things are bleak right now because it's so cold and it's rainy right now. It was snowy before. So everybody has a little bit of the winter blues, but real true wanting to not be around people, getting irritated, uncontrollable crying, even thoughts of wanting to hurt yourself, true mental illness. And I would ask, how many pieces are mental illness? And they would give me a number. And so let's say it's like 10 pieces out of the 100. It's a big portion of their life. Then we talk about substance use. And sometimes substance use is more, sometimes substance use is less. It depends on the substance, depends on how much they used it, depends on the family and the home that they were born in. We know that a third of who is making the choice to use comes from a genetic predisposition. Does not mean it's guaranteed to happen, but genetic predisposition. If your parents use substances before you were born, there is a third of a environmental disposition, where if it's normalized in the home, you have a greater chance for struggling with substance misuse. And then there's a third that it just goes into the choices that you make, where people may have no background in substance misuse with their family, or even being around it, and they still struggle with it. And so I'd ask them, how many pieces of that puzzle are you struggling with substance use? And I've heard anywhere from like 10 to 50. And imagine that 50% of your life, or let's take a better estimate, more like 25 is a typical number I hear from people really coming in for counseling and cannot quit, having cravings, withdrawal symptoms, getting in trouble with the law or family. And 25% of their entire life is about substances. And we say, we're going to stop using that. And they were using it to cope with the 10 pieces of mental illness that's still part of their life and may be there for quite a while. Counseling hopes to resolve some of that. And medication hopes to resolve some of that. But for some people, some things last for a really long time. And so 50% or 25% of the puzzle is gone now. And we use that to help cope with another 10% of the puzzle. That puzzle is not a puzzle anymore. It's just a collection of pieces that really don't make up a full picture. And so we talk about treatment, we talk about how do we help that person try to figure out who they are. We also know with substance use that when someone is struggling with using, I've had this many times in the last couple of years, where someone comes in and says, I'm really struggling. I'm losing friends, I'm losing family. They're stopping talking to me, and this using is so hard to quit. It's not a matter of a moral failing. Maybe the first time that they used it, they became addicted to it was a moral failing. Maybe they decided to go and drink when they were underage and they knew they weren't supposed to. Maybe it was a matter of partying and doing things that they weren't supposed to. But when you get to a dependency, it's not really about making moral choices, but struggling with an addiction, those cravings, those withdrawals, those need to continue to use, even though you know you don't want to, and struggling to quit. And that in and of itself can struggle with mental health. And so people become depressed about it. People become anxious about it. Even more so, we know that the culture of substance misuse can be very traumatizing, especially with illicit substances where people are trying to use. And there's a lot of domestic violence that goes hand in hand with mental health and with substance use. And when you combine them together, it's extremely high with trauma. And so we know that the percentage of people struggling with domestic violence that are using substances is over 70%. So if you're using substances, the likelihood of you struggling with domestic violence and being the victim of it is extremely high, which leads to trauma, which leads to more mental health, even if you already were struggling with mental health in the first place. We also know that there are substances out there like marijuana or methamphetamines, even alcohol, that with extended use for periods of time, and with meth, sometimes not extended time, sometimes a little bit. Marijuana, I had a couple clients that used it only a couple times, and they developed permanent anxiety. They developed permanent depression. They developed permanent psychosis. It wasn't something that they had a psychotic episode while they were using, they were hearing and seeing things not there, but that continued on even beyond the use. When they were sober, they decided they're never using again, and they were still having paranoia. They were still having extreme anxiety. They were still struggling with hearing and seeing things that were not there. And it can sometimes even look more scary than what typical psychosis would be. And psychosis in and of itself is not a fun experience to have, depending on how you go about therapy with it. So we understand that addiction leads to mental health, and it becomes this vicious cycle. In fact, I teach this group that we're currently running that talks about criminal thinking. It talks about substance misuse and getting stuck in this cycle where originally you were using for some reason. I wanted to go be able to socialize. I don't struggle with mental illness. I don't have an addiction, but I wanted to go to the bar because I wanted to make friends, or I wanted to meet a girl and be able to talk to them. And the only way I felt like I could do that was if I had a couple of drinks in me. The problem is you do that again, you do that again, and it's very effective, at least for that brief moment. And so you continue to use, and you continue to use. And you get to a place where you actually find yourself psychologically dependent on it. And you decide, you know what, I need to quit, or you get in trouble and you have to be off of it because of legal reasons, whatever that reason for stopping to use is. And you are in a place where you're using and you can't use anymore, so you have to deal with your mental health. But in dealing with your mental health, you know that that's a quick fix for you, or you could really work hard and work a long time to try to address coping skills that just weren't there anymore because you were using alcohol before, or you decide to really address some of the trauma or fix some of the relationships in your life. And if you know relationships, that doesn't just happen overnight. It's not like everybody just like, okay, everything's fine and I trust you now. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes time for that to really, really establish. And so you're struggling with all this stuff. And now it's like, well, I don't want to feel anxious anymore. I need to go to work. I need to be able to parent my kids. I need to get to sleep tonight. And so what do? You go and use. And in that moment of using, it causes you more stress. It causes you to feel more depressed or guilty. And what have you learned to be able to deal with that? Go back and use again. And all of a sudden, you're back in this cycle that you were before and you got in trouble for it, but you're back in the cycle of use, strong mental illness symptoms, using to cope with them. And that puzzle pieces that was not there continues to slip even further. And so really, when we talk about trying to address mental health and substance use, we really have to not only address the person wholly, and that includes their medical, that includes them as a person beyond their presenting problems, because they are more than a diagnosis. It also means their religiousness. It's also their culture. It's also their family. It's also what they want to accomplish in their lives or have the ability to do for themselves. And so it's this task that requires many people to really play a part in what they can do for themselves. So I want to challenge you guys. I'm kind of putting this out there. If you are able to check in with people, this COVID pandemic has been interesting, where we know substance use is on the rise. Overdoses and deaths are on the rise. When we talk about overdose rates, we don't know how to measure overdose that were not fatal. So we just talk about overdose as a death thing because we can measure that. And that's been on the rise. In fact, for 18 to 45-year-olds, it is the #1 cause of death is overdosing. And 70% of the time it's with fentanyl in it, but people aren't just going out and using fentanyl, it's just in the substance that they're using. And they become dependent on it, or they just overdose the first time and die. And so one of the things that they are advocating for is check in. If you had a best friend that before COVID, you were really connected with, or you got to do a lot of stuff, and because of COVID and everything else that happened, you're not checking in with them anymore. You just lost touch. Go ask how they're doing, because more often than not, they're struggling, and they're not struggling in a little bit, they're struggling in a bigger way. Maybe not mental illness, maybe not substance use, but also maybe that. And they may have found themselves hiding away and trying to cover up this shame, this guilt, this worry about their own mental illness that they're dealing with. I encourage you guys, please just go check in, go see what's going on. And if you can, offer supports, maybe help them get connected in services. You're not their counselor. You don't need to be the end all be all for them. They have to make that choice themselves, but you can also be a support for them in the meantime. And take care of yourself. Take lots of breaks. Make sure you talk to the ones you love, get lots of sleep, go eat, go exercise, and make sure that you are focusing on the things that you want to focus on. Don't cause yourself to be too busy. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say on this. Love to hear some of the thoughts around this, more questions if you have, because this is a huge topic. See you guys soon.